Knuckles, knees, backs, necks, even toes. Cracking and joints making sounds is really common. But as a physiotherapist, I constantly get asked still, is this normal? Is this okay? Is this bad for me? Thankfully, in today's video, that's what we'll be covering. So we all crack, but what's the facts? Let's go. So we all crack our joints, and that's quite normal. But it's important that we differentiate some of the different sounds in our body, because depending on the sound that's creating, it can let us know whether or not this is something we may not need to worry about, or if it is a bit more serious. I'll touch on cracking, grinding, clunking, popping, and even snapping of the joints. But before I talk about whether it's something we need to treat or stop doing, let's first talk about what's actually happening and some of the misconceptions you might hear. Our joints that allow for movement are mostly called synovial joints. They contain synovial fluid, which is a thick and slippery fluid that allows for the joint to be lubricated and move all loosey-goosey. Inside this fluid, there's a process called cavitation that occurs, where there's a formation of gas and vapor bubbles in response to a decrease in pressure. This decrease in pressure occurs when your joints separate, such as when you intentionally or unintentionally crack a joint as you push them to their limits. This will happen until they reach a breaking point, where they'll collapse and they'll release high energy, which results in the sound of the crack that we all know and love. A study by Unsworth et al., where they observed the cracking of a knuckle, demonstrated this audible crack, which was also associated with some joint separation. Though we're only talking about millimeters, I'd be curious to think if it is this joint separation that sort of makes us feel once we crack and we feel a bit looser. This separation though does resolve within about 15 minutes. And this is also the same as the resolution of the gas and vapor bubbles. That's why it does always take a little bit of time before we can crack our knuckles again after hearing a nice big crunch. But is this bad for us? So let's talk about some of the misconceptions and assumptions or assertions people have made before about cracking joints. Number 1, even if it doesn't hurt right now, if you keep doing it, you're going to develop pain and joint arthritis. This makes sense, right? If you do something over and over again, eventually it's going to wear down the joint, okay? But wait a second, I'm 28, I crack my knuckles about 3 times a day minimum. Oh man, I'm probably really close to developing this arthritis, right? Wrong. Thankfully, this is a load of hosh-posh. You may have heard of Dr. Donald Unger, who cracked the knuckles on his left hand for about 50 years, about twice a day, without ever cracking the ones on his other hand. To many people's surprise, after this period, there was no discernible difference from his left to right hand in joint degradation or the formation of arthritis. Now, a study of one person generally isn't great evidence. However, there have been a few studies that also back these claims up, like this one here and here. And a study from Botin et al. Cracked 400 knuckles and showed no immediate adverse effects following these cracks. Although they did notice a slight increase in range of motion in the knuckles that cracked to those that did not. At present, there is no substantial evidence to state that cracking your knuckles is harmful in any way. Although it is worth noting that there also is no evidence to show that there is any long-term benefits of cracking any of your joints. Number 2, cracking joints releases endorphins that make us feel good. We all know cracking a joint feels good. And I've read various articles claiming that when we do crack a joint, it releases endorphins, which is the reason why we feel good. But here's the thing, I've searched high and low and I haven't found any substantial scientific evidence to actually prove this. As stated in a 2002 review article by Picker looking at spinal manipulation, which has similar cracks that occur there like you and I would when we crack our own joints, they stated the effects of spinal manipulation on the release of beta endorphins are currently unknown. Which basically means that at this point in time, there is no evidence or proof to show that when a joint is cracked, it does release endorphins. However, if there is evidence out there that I have not seen, please send it my way. I'm always happy to learn. Number 3, that cracking your joints will stunt your growth. When I was young, I had dreams of being a 6'8" NBA player. So in order to achieve this, I did everything to maximize my growth. I drank way too much milk for somebody that is quite lactose intolerant. I hung from bars and trees to stretch myself out, and I avoided cracking my back at all costs because of the fear and the thought that it would stunt my growth. But as you know now, cracking has nothing to do with the bones, but the spaces between them, especially not your growth plates, where the actual growth happens. Remember, your height is mainly determined by genetics, diet, and other environmental factors, rather than how often you turn, crack, and pop your back when you're sitting in the middle of class. It is important to note that we have been talking about cracks and pops without pain. So if you do crack something and it is painful, or you get any other abnormal symptoms, or even if the joint locks up, then it's likely this is more serious and you want to seek further advice. So cracking is bad. But what about some of those other sounds I talked about before? Let's check them out. Clunking. If your joints emit a clunking sound, often accompanied with the feeling of the joint moving in and out of place, it may be an indication of an unstable joint. Whether it's painful or not, an unstable joint has higher risk of injury, and it has potential to wear down the structures surrounding that joint. This clunking could also be a symptom of something a bit more serious, say a cyclops lesion after an ACL reconstruction, or even a partially dislocated shoulder, otherwise known as a subluxation. First of all, it's important that you avoid activities and positions which exacerbate the instability, rather focusing on the strength and stability surrounding the musculature around the joint. Take the shoulder joint, for example. You want to prioritize strengthening up the rotator cuff to assist in securing the humerus bone, this one up here, into the shoulder socket joint. Start with a manageable weight for resistance exercises for up to 10 to 15 repetitions for 3 to 4 sets, and then start building up from there. Additionally, exercises like a high plank with shoulder taps or a bottom-up kettlebell press can help enhance joint stability under load. Snapping. If you experience a snapping or flicking sensation when going through movement, it could indicate either a tendon subluxation, ligament damage, or even nerve involvement. This can be seen commonly in the elbow and hip joints. Once again, some conditions may require surgical intervention, but others may be able to do without. Let's take the hip, for example. You may be suffering from either external or internal snapping hip. External snapping hip arises from the ITB, or the iliotibial band, flicking over your greater trochanter, which is the bone on the side of your femur, the big thigh bone. Whereas internal snapping hip comes from your hip flexor or iliopsoas tendon, flicking over the bony prominence at the front of your hip. These could also be caused by loose bodies, torn cartilage, or even a fracture. But those are the ones that will need to have surgical intervention, like I mentioned before. For me personally, I actually suffer from internal snapping hip. But sadly, there isn't great evidence about what exercises to do to manage or to assist in the healing of this. But from what's out there at the moment, in my experience with myself and other patients I see, here's what I do. I first identify what movement or activity causes the snapping. For me, it's mostly extending my hip from a flex, abducted, and externally rotated position, but can happen in a neutral position too, and generally with more increased speed in movement and less control. Once we know when it's occurring, literature tells us to avoid repetition of this to limit aggravation and damage to the involved structures. From here, you want to build up good muscle strength around the hip, as well as maintain good muscle length and flexibility. And this exercise is a great one to help stretch out the thigh, the hip flexors, and with enough intensity and time will actually improve your flexibility and muscle length. Grinding. This is one of the more nastier sounds, as it's similar to when you first pour milk onto your Rice Krispies or Rice Bubbles. The grinding sensation is usually felt underneath the kneecap, otherwise known as the patellofemoral joint. The causes can range from damage of the cartilage underneath the kneecap to even a misalignment of the kneecap within its groove. Genetic factors also play a significant role. For example, someone may be born with a kneecap which doesn't smoothly track along its knee groove. Fortunately, there are non-surgical options to address this as well. Initially, you may want to tape the kneecap to try and glide it in the right position to avoid any misalignment. Research has also shown that strengthening the muscles around your hip and improving the stability between your hip and your knee are also effective strategies. You can start with exercises like a double leg bridge with a band in between, a single leg bridge, side planks with clams or leg raises, and add stability exercises like step downs, focusing on controlled movement and stability through the knee, hip, and ankle. Remember though, perform these exercises without pain. If you are feeling pain, you may need to try another one. But David, where's the exercises for cracking joints? Although I know we've talked about that actually isn't a problem you need to fix, but for some people, the noise can be a bit too annoying. My recommendation is actually quite simple. It is quite general. Move more. When you move and when you exercise, your body releases more of the synovial fluid we talked about, which helps lubricate your joints. Building up strength and flexibility in your joints throughout their full range can anecdotally help this and reduce some of these sounds, but generally not completely. So yes, our body makes sounds, and some of these are potentially bad and more serious, but generally cracks are normal. So don't stress, you don't need to crack less. So if you found this helpful, please subscribe and look out for more videos. Peace.